having me. Thank you, Pierre, for organizing this. I want to talk to you about a tiny slice of what we're doing tonight in the Peace Innovation Lab, and about how that fits in with technology. And if we get a little bit of time, we'll touch on how that also intersects with business in unexpected ways. But essentially, I want to give you a quick look at peace data, because most of us, most of the time, when we think about do we know what peace is? First of all, to be able to get a good sense of it, we have to be able to measure it in some way. And the moment we start trying to measure peace, we run into a bunch of interesting issues. So I'm going to very quickly show you one schematic for one way to measure peace. I'm going to show you a little bit about how we can now begin to instrument our external environment rather than having to pull people into the lab to study this kind of stuff. And then I'm going to touch on the implications of that for sustainable and scalable peace initiatives that come from an engineering and technology perspective, rather than some of the other approaches, which are also necessary and legitimate. So start with a quick question, actually. How many of you took Uber to come here tonight, or Lyft, or any other ride-sharing service? Okay. How many of you paid attention to your driver's group identities at all? Like, was your driver a different nationality than you? Was your driver a different gender than you? Different age, different language group maybe? Okay, so these kinds of group identities help us get some traction on things right away. I want to suggest to you that for most of human history, we've been having episodes of engagement as a species between person A and person B, and they look a little bit like this. We have, here we are, person A, some sort of a difference boundary, and here we are, person B.
Mark, suggestion.
Yeah.
Try to write on the upper side of the whiteboard.
Okay.
So everybody can see from the back.
We'll lift it higher. What you start noticing right away is as soon as two people get together, the way our brains are wired, we start noticing how we're different from each other. And sociologists refer to one set of these as the big 8 group differences. Anybody know what they are? So I mentioned a few of them. What are the things you notice about other people right away where you go, well, this person is different than me?
Gender.
Age.
Exactly. So gender is one. Age. Okay, and I should actually be writing these in the middle, because what you see is we have multiple group identities on either side of those boundaries.
Ethnicity.
So this one might be male, might be female, and then we have other options there. Age, we can very roughly say young, and old. What are some other ones?
Race.
Odor,
Sorry?
how they smell.
Not one of the big ones, but for other species it absolutely is.
Race.
Somebody mentioned race or ethnicity. Yeah. I'm doing this again wrong. You can see that there are many different group differences around on either side of that boundary.
Size. How they're dressed.
Yeah. So dress would reflect, for example, socioeconomic status.
Yeah.
If I just put SES, what do you remember what that is? But that's basically, we could say, you know, rich and poor, or some other status aspect. Other ones.
Or culture. The way they're.
So when you get at culture things, if you have a little bit of interaction with somebody, you start detecting very quickly perhaps their political orientation, at least very broadly speaking, if they are sort of open-minded, novelty-seeking, interested in new or different things, or much more traditional and want things to stay the same. You know, I don't think the words liberal and conservative translate literally anymore. They've been compromised. But so yeah, we start noticing political orientation. We start noticing also religious affiliation, if there is one, and so on.
Intelligence.
Language is huge. Okay, language is huge, and so on. So there's general agreement that there's about 8 of these that our brains are optimized to notice right away or very quickly. One other one that's interesting, because our species depends on noticing bonding opportunities or mating opportunities for survival, we notice sexual orientation as well. So that's interesting. You get an episode of engagement. Somebody shares some food or some water or shelter or warmth around a fire. We've been doing that for as long as we've been a species, basically. The thing that gives us our competitive advantage as a species, by the way, is our ability to get large groups of people doing these kinds of episodes of reasonably mutually beneficial interactions. Something happened in the world. What do you see missing from this picture that is now different? You know, not here 10 years ago, and all of history before that, and suddenly in the last decade or so, everywhere.
Cell phones.
Yeah, not just cell phones, but you're right. So I'm going to say this is the old model of episodes of human engagement. The new model looks similar but different. You have person A still. Let's call this the new model. And person A now has a device in his hand, a device on his belt, a device on his upper arm maybe, or on his wrist, or on his glasses, on his desk, in his car, in his microwave if you're following the, all sorts of places, right? We have all of these sensors everywhere, and a lot of these sensors can detect human behavior. And a lot of them particularly can detect human social behavior. Social behavior is always oriented towards some kind of a person B. And what's different here now? Let's give person B all the same kind of devices there. Person B can be on the outside of the world now, can't they? What are some of the other differences here?
Well, obviates a lot of the verticals, because if you're having digital discourse, then you don't see someone's height or ethnicity necessarily.
Right? Some other group identities start to become much more salient in any given interaction. Another interesting aspect of this is we can transcend time now in ways that over here we had to be in the same place at the same time. Now I can upload something on archive.org, and Brewster can read it 20 years from now. And so we can interact across time in very interesting ways as well. So what I want you to see in the middle of all of these things, sensors that pull data up like this, and we have all these things that we don't think of them this way, but I want you to start thinking of them this way. These are mediating technologies. And every time somebody builds a new web app, a new mobile app, a new anything, they're probably building a mediating technology, because the thing that makes those technologies valuable is they mediate our engagement with another human being, which again, being able to do that better is our one survival skill that has allowed us to begin to secure our position on this planet. What do we get out of mediating technology that we never had before in that picture? Really rich, episode by episode, real-time descriptions of episodes of engagement. Right? So who took Uber here again? Okay. What Uber allowed you to do was discover a person you had never met and allowed them to discover you. Allowed you to begin to direct your attention to each other, begin to communicate, I need a car, and I'm here, begin to coordinate your activity, begin to cooperate, and then do something really interesting, trust each other when you met. Create a new episode of economic activity as well, that turns out to be crucial. And walk away where, because Uber, your driver has to submit his driver's license and so on, they know his identity, they can correlate that with a bunch of his other group identities, but they know things like also like where he lives. And so Uber can track not only that you paid him $7.82 or whatever it was, but they have a good idea of where most of that $7.82 will be spent. It's probably where he's paying his rent, you know? All sorts of that kind of engagement data, you get it real time, episode by episode. That data allows us to simulate the relationship, or to model the relationship between any person A and person B now, That modeling ability lets us simulate many different ways that relationship could go. The simulation ability lets us design interventions and harvest those kinds of interventions that seem to be most interesting or have the most potential. And we can deploy those interventions very quickly right back into that stack of mediating technologies. And when we do that, one of the interesting things we discover, we can very quickly discover what moves the needle on increasing positive engagement between person A and B and what doesn't. We can also very quickly begin to discover all sorts of new group identities that weren't easily perceptible to the human brain over here. What do you think some of those are?
Beliefs.
Trekkies.
Yes, so affiliations like, I like this kind of science fiction, you like that kind of science fiction. The people who like Star Trek, awesome. The people who like Star Wars, that scares me because we're moving towards that future, but that's a whole other topic. So all these tiny little specialized group affiliations, you mentioned.
Beliefs, just in general.
Yes, but we get much higher resolution on beliefs now, especially as we start seeing more informative interactions. If you join, you know, this particular discussion group on Facebook or that particular book reading group or something like that, you know, it gives much more nuance into those things. What else?
Attention span.
Yes, absolutely. So we begin to look into real underlying biological, all sorts of biological phenomena. So what I want you to see here is, it turns out that we all have thousands of group identities, not just the big 8. And that a lot of this stuff is discoverable based on this kind of engagement data behavior. And we can then take, so there's this notion of salience in social sciences that yes, you have thousands of group identities. How many of you are a parent? How many of you are a parent of a boy versus a girl? You see, that's suddenly 2 different group identities. Parents is the same group identity, but parents of boys, parents of girls, 2 different group identities. Parents of a boy that is 12 years old as opposed to a boy that is 11 years old. Those are 2 different group identities. Parents of a boy that likes toy X versus toy Y. That's suddenly another set of group identities. And we're in this very interesting world right now where marketing companies are paying billions of dollars to figure out which groups you're in and when you're likely to leave them and join some other group. And I'm not necessarily saying that's a wonderful thing, but if you're a researcher trying to help people identify what things they have in common, if I can talk to a Russian and a Ukrainian, yes, a Russian and a Ukrainian, and no Russians and Ukrainians here tonight? If I can help them begin to see, rather than the thing that is causing a war between their countries right now, that they have that conflict in common, if they can also see, hey, we're both parents of a 12-year-old boy, hey, both our boys like soccer, hey, both of them play this position on the soccer team, when the human brain starts seeing those kinds of things in common, you can begin to elicit a little bit of empathy, a little bit of compassion, in a computational way. You can now detect where those commonalities are and design and target interventions to reach into those commonalities or to make those similarities salient in a way that they wouldn't otherwise be. What this then means is we can start tracking episodes of engagement between any 2 groups. And one way to model it out is we can look at the quality of engagement. If this is 0 and we're looking at negative quality of engagement, and the quantity of engagement from 0 to lots or something like that. When a relationship is going bad, we can literally model it between 2 people episode by episode, and we can see at time 1 it was here, and at time 2 it was here, and at time 3 you know, not as bad, but more episodes of negative engagement, and then wow, people really started, you know, it went downhill. As you abstract a trend line through that, you can start seeing the direction this relationship is heading. Once you see that that direction is going somewhere you don't want to go, and if it keeps going that direction, one or both parties will hurt each other or terminate each other. Then you can start looking at, okay, how do we design interventions on that trend line and try and drive things back in that direction? And using this kind of stuff, we can measure right away, is that intervention working or not? That's a huge advantage for somebody trying to design peace initiatives, or especially peace technology, is being able to see right away, does my intervention, does my hypothesis move the needle on this problem or not? But what I want you to notice here is, this is our traditional notion of peace, which is how do we get people to be less violent to each other? And in this field of peace metrics, the original work that moved the field from being a very qualitative, squishy kind of field to being a quantitative, metrics-oriented field was done by a gentleman named Edward Azar at Stanford back in the 70s. He had grad students reading newspapers from home in their own language and tallying up body counts in the margins. And then once a year, he would gather those together and publish them and be able to say things like, 156 fewer people died in Cyprus this year than last year, so there must be more peace in Cyprus. And that became the conflict and peace database. It's an ongoing, one of the most beautiful longitudinal data sets we have. It moved conflict and peace studies from being squishy qualitative things to being much more quantitative. But I want you to notice, he was measuring violence and then making an inference about peace. And when you're working down here, getting people to be less violent to each other, getting people to stop being violent altogether is not actually peace. That's just absence of violence. The key thing to notice there is it's not very stable. Especially when you have people living in dense urban populations, the chance that they just continue to ignore each other is not high. So the research question here is getting people to be less bad to each other. That's not actually where we work in our lab, but you need to understand this in order to look at what does positive engagement look like. And we're interested in design of engagement in this space. First thing you notice is you got to get person A and person B to be aware of each other at all. Most of the conflicts in the world, or most of the harm we do to each other, is driven by a complete lack of awareness that my purchase of my new electronic device paid for a warlord to wipe out your family around conflict minerals in Central Africa. Those kinds of things are just really hard for us to comprehend at a distance and figure out what we should then do about that. But if we can start to direct awareness, that then means we can start to elicit attention between person A and person B. If we can do attention really well, that enables us to start eliciting communication between them. If we can do communication really well, you start seeing that enables us to coordinate our activity. And if we can do coordination well, you start getting cooperation. And then a really interesting thing happens. First thing I want you to notice here, though, is there are augmenting technologies that match these layers of episode quality or engagement quality between people. So, how many of you used a calendar to schedule the laser talk tonight so that you would know that you should be here at 7 o'clock, right? That's a coordination technology. And there's an episode of engagement on that coordination technology between Piero organizing this talk and you as an attendee. And then we can look at Piero's group identities and yours, and we can measure, wow, 2 hours of mostly positive engagement, except for the guy that talked too long. 2 hours of that happened as a result of this tonight, and that coordinating technology, and then if you used maps as well to find your way here, now we get moment by moment, passively collected engagement data that tells us about engagement between any of your group identities and the group identities of other people in the room. That begins to get really interesting when we're doing positive things instead of reducing negative things. In the literature, this is called negative peace. As I said, we don't play here much. We have a hypothesis that things we're doing up here actually drain energy and incentives out of this area, but that has yet to be proven. This is positive peace, but I want you to notice something here. If we were having a great time tonight and we said, let's do this again tomorrow night, and we had a great time again tomorrow night and said, let's do this again for a year, at some point we wouldn't be able to sustain it, right? No matter how interesting a time we have together, it's not something we could maintain at that level. So what I want you to see here, although this is much more positive than anything down here, it's positive but unstable peace. Somebody tell me why it's unstable.
Requires energy.
Requires energy is a very good insight. Unstable and unstable because it's unsustainable. Unsustainable why?
Takes too much resource.
Exactly.
What
Exactly. So what you start noticing here is the cost of engagement for person A and person B exceeds the mutual benefit generated up until this level. But if you go over this threshold, I'm going to use a very specific definition of collaboration here. Mutual benefit in excess of the cost of engagement. And when you took Uber here tonight, Brewster, you created mutual benefit in excess of the cost of engagement for you, because you got the transport you needed, and for your driver, because he got the income he needed. And those of us who know Uber well here don't necessarily think of them as a peace tech company at all, right? But they have this lovely non-toxic byproduct, industrial byproduct of their industrial process that is peace data, that actually gets over this line. They can do this again and again and again, and they can take a little bit of the profit they generate and invest it in making the next episode of engagement between passenger A and driver B even better than the last one. Which puts them in a really interesting place of, if they had to quantitatively prove that they were entitled to the Nobel Peace Prize or something like that, they would actually have the data. And of course, they're not the only one. And of course, it isn't just share economy sorts of plays either. All sorts of companies manage to build technology that gets over this line of mutual benefit in excess of the cost of engagement. And the thing that I want you to see there is those kind of peace initiatives, even if it's a byproduct of their core process, are sustainable and scalable in a way that no government initiative has ever been historically, in a way that no NGO has ever been able to do historically. Guess who is the largest citizen diplomacy initiative in the world right now?
Facebook.
No.
Facebook.
No. Good guess. And if you go to facebook.com/peace, you'll see an experiment we did with them back in the day to prove that we could measure peace this way. You can see exactly how many people friended each other between Israel and Palestine, India and Pakistan, so on, in the last 24 hours. And it's a shockingly large number. Yes?
How would one make an argument then that slavery is not a form of collaboration? Because it seems in this case, slavery is a social contract, whereas in this case you have technology mediating, but at the same time.
So it has to be mutual benefit.
Yeah, mutual benefit in excess of the cost of
Slave
engagement.
isn't benefiting.
So engagement for benefit for person A and person B.
The slave gets food.
I didn't mean to.
The
Yeah.
slave gets shelter.
Also
Well,
true.
in the case of Uber, it might not be that there's any feasible alternative, for instance.
Right.
And so there's some form of monopolization,
Right.
which someone.
Yeah. So that would be the next thing I would point out is, obviously, I used Uber as very deliberately because it's a controversial example, because you can see the upside and the downside. The largest citizen diplomacy initiative that is sustainable right now, by the way, is Airbnb.
Is what?
Airbnb. Because they can show episodes of engagement that they created between a host and a guest, and the quality of engagement from that, and so on, day by day, and they're making money doing it. That's the difference, as opposed to some of these other initiatives that are funded by your tax dollars and so forth. They can scale that indefinitely. That's the key difference. And then we get right to the heart of the question you're asking. Well, how good is that engagement really? And when you have this kind of data, you can start looking and saying, oh my goodness, we have bias on our platform against people of that race. Or, oh my goodness, we have bias on our platform against people of that sexual orientation. And when you can see that and correlate that to lost business, they certainly have all sorts of interesting incentives in ways that we haven't been able to get leverage on them any other way before. They have interesting incentives to do something about that. And so we see Airbnb and Uber both saying, wow, we can actually see there is racism on our platform. Now they're designing interventions to try and reduce that, because they can see how much money they're losing. And they can see very quickly, if we reduce the size of the driver's picture, if we only show the driver's first name, if we reduce the size of, if we don't show the passenger's picture at all, does this limit racism on our platform or not? And they can see in the data often within an hour, yes it does, or no it doesn't. And it's not perfect, and it comes at a cost. And that's what I want you to see as well. these technologies are not silver bullets. They move some of the conflict around, but they also allow us to address this with a precision and a depth of empirical, quantitative, computational approach that has never been possible before. I think I'm done.